That is really.
Like, what are the odds? I digress. Welcome, beautiful people, to the fifth already out of 9 sessions of our Collective Courage book study with the author, Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard. If this is your first time at a Kepler Institute event, once again, welcome. We're a nonprofit organization based in Indianapolis, Indiana, going for over 20 years strong. We're dedicated to building community wealth through social enterprise, youth leadership development, and community discussions and events, just like the ones we find ourselves at right now. You can always go to Kepler.org to learn more about the initiatives that we have going on. It's thanks to the contributions of community members like yourselves that we can keep events like this free and accessible to the public. We ask that you follow the link that will be posted in the chat here shortly to make a donation. We accept anything from 1 penny to $1 million, depending on your bank account statement. We would also like to thank the Indianapolis Recorder newspaper for hosting this event as well. And very excited once again to have Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard with us tonight. She is a political columnist specializing in solidarity economy, community economics, Black political economy, and popular economic literacy. Her research and publications explore the African-American community through the lens of cooperative economic development, worker ownership, wealth inequality, and community-based asset building and approaches to justice. Her magnum opus and the book we'll be delving into further tonight, Collective Courage, History of African-American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. Whew! Every time I say that name, it just takes it right out of my mouth. We will be taking an in-depth look into the socialized approaches of our predecessors, and we are here tonight to see how we can apply those same approaches today. Without further ado, Dr. Gordon Nembhard.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. 5, so we're halfway through, I guess. No.
Yeah, it's like 5 out of 9. So, you know,
I thought it was 5
halfway.
out of 11. We're not doing 11? We have 2 in January.
We are. But what happened is the first one was the intro.
Right.
So that's why he's calling that the intro. So we're on chapter 4 now.
Yeah. The intro. Chapter 4, session 5, you know.
Right. Anyway, sorry to get everyone confused. We're doing chapter 4 today, and we're almost halfway through. We're not quite halfway through. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be here with everybody. I don't know why we've got fewer people on Zoom, but that's okay. Things happen. We're on Facebook as well and recording. I also, before I get into anything, I want to recognize and acknowledge the original occupants of the land, wherever we are, and to bring our ancestors into the space with us, as they should be, and we all are here because of them. So welcome, everybody. Chapter 4 is one of my favorites. I mean, I guess I could probably say that about each chapter, but chapter 4 is the one I think I talk about the most when I talk about this issue, because it comes up in every way, which is how important education is. And I think I mentioned it at the very first when we were doing the introduction, that my publisher was confused because I was telling the story chronologically, and then at chapter 4, I started telling the story thematically. And she thought it would be confusing to the readers, but I finally was able to convince her to let me do it. And one of the things I said was that, yes, I started out telling the story kind of chronologically, you know, what happened in 1800s and 1900s, but that so much of the education stuff happened in the 1930s at this sort of period of time that we were getting to chronologically, that I had to stop and also talk about education and then put in the chronological stuff after I talked about education. And then the same thing is going to happen when I talk about women in a couple chapters later. At some point, you just have to start talking about the special contribution of women and focus on that as a theme instead of just talking about it each time it comes up chronologically. So I wanted to stop us here. We've had some, right? The first couple chapters, we understand what the history of mutual aid has been. We understand the connection and the way that we moved from more informal solidarity, mutual aid, and cooperation to more formal cooperative structures and actual registered cooperative businesses, right? But now the next thing we really need to look at is how important education and training were. And as I say in the first sentence, I think I say it in the introduction, I say it in almost every meeting, every event that I talk about, is that education study circles, almost every co-op that I found anything about started with a study circle. People coming together, learning together, thinking through together what was the problem and how to solve it. And then if cooperation is the way to solve it, how do we do it? And there's a variety of ways, right? I think I listed about 6 different ways that cooperative education happened. The study circles, study groups, creating actual courses and curricula around co-op education, doing pre-training programs, doing in-service training where you're already in the co-op, but you're still learning together, conferences and study circles and networking. So making sure to connect with other people who are doing this, learning from each other and networking. And then public education, making sure that your public, whether it's your customers or the community, understand this, doing brochures, public events, speeches, that kind of thing. And so all those ways, some of the co-ops did every single one of those methods, some did 1 or 2 of those methods, but pretty much they all understood that this learning together, collective learning, was important. And another thing that comes out when you start looking at it that way is that the collective learning is also another way that solidarity and trust gets built among people who have to trust and work together if they're going to run a business together and share money together, right? So you also see that not only is it sort of essential to be educated about cooperatives and how to run them in order to run your business well, in order to do it democratically, but it also turns out it's really kind of part of the melding, right? The process of melding and working together and learning together. So I don't have a PowerPoint this time because I noticed with the PowerPoint, you all just let me talk on and on and on. And the point of a book club is supposed to be that everybody contributes. So I'm hoping that this time I have some questions to ask you guys, some comments of my own. We've got 2 commenters. Hopefully they're here now. So I think we should try to have more of a conversation this time, especially since it's about learning together, which is what we're here for. Do we have, I forgot how to pronounce your name.
Aguila.
Aguila, thank you. And Jeru is here. So Aguila, would you like to start with your reflections?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I thought the main, and a lot for me was, as I was reading, was reflecting on my own experiences within KEPRA and our work of like cooperative economics and collectivism. And so I felt a lot of resonance with especially the piece around education, and not just education and its importance in the start of businesses, but also throughout. I would also say, so some of the other things that jumped out to me that I thought was interesting was that the different modes of education. So, you had study groups, you had trainings, you had also curriculum, formal curriculum, both that existed within institutional spaces and outside, and really looking at how does education exist beyond just like a one finite perspective. I think oftentimes we look at education through the lens of like a teacher in a classroom, but I think the way that education was practiced within cooperatives was already one that was trying to get away from like a dominant, I think, understanding of education. So I was like thinking back to Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of like how cooperatives were engaging in like peer-to-peer education, and also the example of the care workers cooperative. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but the importance of not just hiring like managers, but cultivating managerial experience within the organization or the cooperative itself. And that's something that we at KEPRA practice, of like how we're not like hiring managers to manage projects. They're actually how do we build up the skills and trainings of folks who've been in the work to that level of management and managerial skills. And that's, we have a lot of conversations, a lot of study, circles as well. So yeah, it was just really interesting to see how much of our work still resonates and kind of builds off of the practices from previous, our predecessors. And I think another one, just more directly, the experience of community control food initiative and the, I think it was on page 108, where there was a study group and the education program, so quote, centered on cooperation and as a viable strategy. And the study group held weekly educational meetings for 18 months before opening any business. And that's actually the story of Community Control Food Initiative, where we had started out, it wasn't like a study circle, it was a public forum, but I think it was very similar in that a group of people came together to discuss and, study in a broad way about what was happening and analyzing the conditions on the ground. And CCFI came about. I don't know if Mimi's on the call, but, she was one of the young people who was involved, along with Paulette Fair and some of the other elders. And what they did was, before launching the CCFI a year later, they were doing conversations. I thought was really interesting was like doing public education study circles around food and inviting local chefs in, local leaders or health, care workers to talk about the importance of food in community post the closing of Double 8. And so, that's an organization, that's a cooperative enterprise that we still run to this day, 4 years later. And, we still try to keep that spirit and, the importance of education in that. I think one last piece, maybe before I wrap up and continue to ramble on, I thought was really interesting, even though it doesn't really fit in the theme of education, but the role of the intellectual, and the letter that I think it was the Howard professor Harris had written to W.E.B. Du Bois, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was talking about the importance of the Black intellectual. And in a different book study, we were reading Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth and the role of the Native intellectual. So within Fanon's work, he talks about the intellectual and their role in liberation, and how oftentimes they can be inhibitors if they're not rooting themselves in solidarity with the quote unquote, like the proletariat or the subaltern, or those who are most affected, those folks on the ground. And, you see that to this day, a lot of like post-colonial, I'll say post-colonial, I'm from South Asian. So, you see the role of intellectuals who are considered part of the independence movement, but because they weren't in actual solidarity with the masses, still continue the same structural violence. And it was interesting to see the parallels and W.B. Du Bois' challenges with the NAACP, and how there were members of the board that were very hesitant to go towards more of a left-leaning politic or even a cooperative economic politic, because they just refused to think of that. And just like the role of like, what is the role of an intellectual? How is that tied to education? And do you need to have an intellectual, I say intellectual in quotes, to be educated? How do you have education that's really rooted both in the experiences and also melds theory? And I really thought that the way that you talked about like education that exists, and the fundamental role of cooperatives providing educations in its structure, even if they may not have been successful, the education that it provided is invaluable to not just talking about the concept and understanding of cooperatives and cooperative economics, but all these other skills. And so, yeah, I'll end there.
Great, thank you so much. That was excellent. I actually had written down that I was going to ask what people thought about Abram Harris's letter and Du Bois's response. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm trying to decide whether I should see what other people think first or just say what I think, but I know you also come to hear me, so I'll say something and then I'll see if anyone else wants to comment. Yeah, the Abram Harris letter, I actually found it intriguing on a number of counts. One, like you said, that tension between, intellectuals, right? Is it only intellectuals who can read or who have these ideas or not, that kind of thing. And then the role of public intellectuals and the grassroots. And so both Abram Harris, Dr. Harris, and Du Bois are in some ways, they have elitist tendencies, right? Mm-hmm. Du Bois actually gets over some of his, I think by the 1930s, he doesn't really talk about the talented 10th anymore, which he used to talk about in the 1890s and stuff. Even though he believes in people being well educated and that there's a role for intellectuals, but I think he stopped worrying about whether we needed leadership from the talented 10th or whether you could get leadership in other places. And I like to think it's partly because of his interest in cooperative economics that he realized that there's different kinds of knowledge and leadership can come in different ways. But the other thing that was important, I think, about Abram's letter to Du Bois was Du Bois's answer, which is that, now I'm more interested in economic action. I'm not so interested in economic theory anymore. I don't know where exactly. I think I put that in there. But he says, at some point we have to stop theorizing and intellectualizing about it, and we just have to do it. So I think that was also an interesting juxtaposition, especially from someone, right, who the first Harvard PhD or whatever is saying, you know what, at some point you just have to do this stuff, stop intellectualizing about it. But the third thing, the reason why I put such a long quote from Harris's letter also was, though, that Harris and Du Bois in different places have talked about this period, the 20th century, as being a period of monopolization of capital, meaning we were getting more and more conglomerates and larger corporations monopolizing everything, owning everything, right? They were doing it with farming, they were doing it with manufacturing, right? And they were worried that this was going to be another way to leave Blacks out. And so Du Bois said it about a decade or two before. Harris said it in his letter, but Harris was talking about, right, the world is cartelizing, meaning monopolizing. We're going to be left behind, but maybe if we start our own cooperatives and start owning our own companies, that way we might be able to stop that process, and we might be able to make sure that Blacks don't get left behind. And that's another piece that I was never able to follow up. I didn't really follow it up in the book, but I always meant to try to figure out how to write something more, or think more about that, because this notion of putting us in the forefront of economic development, or the forefront of what's going to happen in the third phase or second or third phases of industrialization by using economic democracy, right? Race-based economic democracy is a really interesting notion that we still don't talk about, though I was just talking to a group last month who was talking about, what are we in the fourth or fifth phase of industrialization, which is the digital age?
Yeah, the fourth revolution.
Right, revolution, and that we should be thinking about Blacks, right, leading that revolution, since we missed the other three, right? And that, can we do that again if we do it through collectivizing production and a collective notion of cooperative platforms and things like that in the digital world? Maybe that's the chance for us to really not be left behind again. So we're still, in the 21st century trying to think about that. And Harris's letter, as I said, mentions that too, which was one of the other reasons why I put that in there. So I do think those are interesting things for us to talk about, but also to see, right, the debates, right? Because between intellectuals, but also the people who are actually doing the co-op practice, are having interesting debates about what it means, where do they fit in history, how can they move forward, what's the best way to move forward. And so I guess hopefully you guys found that interesting too. I definitely found that interesting. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I do. This is Pambana, and for me, I guess what I kind of found interesting was the fact that, like you chronicle how he wrote about in the crisis and all these different things about cooperatives that were taking place. But then it seemed to me that both him and Harris were pessimistic. And I was like, well, is that because they feel like the intellectuals were not involved? Because it kept saying that he didn't give it as much attention. And so for me, I wondered why he didn't feel the sense that, okay, well, maybe the intellectuals won't come along, or the NAACP, but we have these activities taking place in our community amongst our people. And maybe there's a way that, myself, I can help them either, continue to build their education, their awareness, their skills, or help to connect them and that kind of stuff. But it just kind of seems like he kind of gave up. And so I was trying to understand why, he kept saying he didn't take it as seriously or put as much effort into it. And so for me, and then the other thing is though, like, and when you talked about, I guess it's the cartelized and even, just throughout it. And then there was the part about I think it's the Bluefield. I just looked at it on page 109. There was the cooperative that they had a store, and then they had a school, and they were doing well until things got bad. And so it made me look at, so, and you didn't share what happened, but I felt like, like right now, things are bad for a lot of African Americans. So even in the context of, if we look at cooperatives and how we build them, what is it that we need to be aware of in the context of, especially when there's high unemployment and there's high poverty and there's low income, that we need to do to kind of make sure that they're sustainable, or that we can do the best that we can, because they were doing really good, but it said, ultimately they closed. So for me, I guess I would say those are the kind of the two, I guess I would say, I don't want to say ironies, but questions in my mind about, why didn't he give it as much effort? When clearly he believed in it and people were doing it and they were being successful. And then in the context of this being, to me, similar to that time period in terms of economics and unemployment and those kind of things, what is the lesson to be learned about how to sustain it? Because even the most successful ones ended up going out of business.
Yeah, so in terms of Du Bois, so it's in his 1940 autobiography that he reflects back to the Negro Cooperative Guild that he started in 1918, and then some of the other co-op stuff he was promoting in the 20s and early 30s. So by the 40s, he's what? He must be 70 years old by then? 40, 50, 60. He died at what, 90 something in the 60s? So yeah, he might even have been 40.
As in 1963, I think he was like 93 or something when he died.
Or something. So in the 40s, he was in his late 60s, early 70s. So, right. So he's kind of, I mean, he didn't really retire, but you know what I mean? He's writing the autobiography. He's looking back on what he did and didn't do. And I think he was just saying that, that he probably should have focused or pressed the economics more, but other things happened. One of the things he said in the early teens was World War I, and he got caught up in that and socialism versus whatever. And then I forget what caught him up in the 20s. Anyway, it seems like he was saying he partly got caught up in other stuff and shouldn't have, now in hindsight, shouldn't have allowed that to happen. If you think about what we know him for, he certainly got caught up in doing so much other stuff, right? I mean, he was called upon to be a statesman for this and the spokesman for that, and right. So I think also he may be lamenting that he kind of allowed the publicness of himself to take over instead of focusing on the stuff, right? So I think that's part of it. But I think also, even though we didn't have red baiting and stuff until the 50s, it was not comfortable for Blacks to be socialist or communist or to talk about this kind of stuff throughout any of that period. And so I think he was also kind of lamenting that he hadn't found a way to talk about it that people would listen, right? That's the sense I had. And Harris also was considered a radical economist, but I think he also is better known for other stuff, you know, and this is kind of a lament I have through the whole writing the whole book. Every time I find these Black leaders, we knew them about them for all kinds of other stuff, but, you know, they weren't able to get their co-op stuff really out there. And I think part of it is because it was so, you know, you were considered a traitor to the US, you were considered, right, a communist. Even before red baiting, you weren't supposed to be a communist. And for Blacks, it's really hard. We're marginalized for everything else, right? To be marginalized for the economic stuff too. I think it's hard to maintain that and hard to make that your platform. So I think, right, I think we can think about why is it so hard in this society, but I think that's what it is, right? If you're marginalized everywhere, it's, you know, socially and politically and whatever, you know, it's hard to just accept, you know, and say, I'll be marginalized for this too, or ostracized for this too. So I think that has somewhat to do with it. And I think it's also been hard, as I said, you know, people definitely have just practiced it, but it's been hard for it to be a full-blown, very public movement. You know, and then finally, it's true that Harris and, as I said, and Du Bois were a little bit elitist, so they also might have been hoping for more of an intellectual vanguard and not as focused on what was happening to everyday people. However, when you look at the writings that Du Bois did do on co-ops, he was actually, a lot of his writings were reporting on what everyday Blacks were doing in co-ops. So I think I talked about this before we got on, before everybody got on, but, you know, we all have contradictions. And that's the other thing. I was trying to be honest about the contradictions without making it too, you know, without trying to get into he said, she said, or he did this but said that, or he said that but did this. But I did want to show that we're all, you know, we're all complicated people. We all have contradictions. We all change. You know, the other thing about Du Bois, he lived 93 years. He changed over that time. Think about all the different ideas you had in your lifetime. I don't mean you, just you, Pambana. I just mean all of us, right? We do change over time in what we either think is important or what we think we know, or how we think we know something, or what we think is important. And so that's the other thing, you know, especially with him, I was able to follow his thought for decades. It is interesting where he changed and where he didn't change over those years. But I also think we need to, I think it's helpful for us to think about the fact that we're all hypocrites in some ways, and we all have contradictions in some ways. And we say some stuff and do a different thing. We believe some stuff, but don't act on it for our own, you know, for different reasons. And I think that comes up in the co-op movement, right? We have a lot of people who somehow were trying to practice it in their everyday quiet life, but they weren't necessarily willing to talk about it or expose themselves. And sometimes for really good reasons. And sometimes for reasons we don't know. But as I said, sometimes we know the reasons. They were going to be lynched, or the co-op was going to be taken away from them or something. So it's a really interesting history. I hope I was able to.
I thought it was great. I just say that even though we are practicing and attempting models that are resistant, you still live in the ocean of white supremacy. And that's right. Not just physically, but even with our intellectual developments, often built and developed inside institutions that have alternative worldviews that we're always busy trying to reset, right, while we're still in the water of it. So the only other thing it makes me think of is that if we can find a way to merge the idea of intellect where it's theory and practice. Action is a form of intellectualism, but it comes out of the practice that then informs the theory. So.
Right, and I think Gila, did I mess up your name again? I think she.
No, you're right.
You mentioned that, right? And I like the way you brought in Fanon and some other people who are trying to talk about organic intellectuals, and that, right, intellectual doesn't have to mean learned or educated, right? And I think that's important. And I think we see that. And I do think you're right. I mean, that was my intention and how I understood co-op education, that it makes a space for that kind of knowledge also.
Well, you talked about how how the practice, social capital is informed through the practice.
Right.
So yeah, the theory and practice go hand in hand. Even the whole idea of democracy that then informs your consciousness. So that was great.
Right. So I'm glad that came through. Yeah.
Hey, Professor.
Yes, go ahead, Ken.
Ken. Something I wanted you to resolve for me. First of all, I wanted to say I love your picture in the background. It's a lovely picture.
I just realized I'm probably not supposed to have that. My daughter sent it to me, and then it was taken off of Facebook because I think the woman who did it didn't have the rights to make the Care Bears into Black Power. I mean, Black Lives Matter people. But anyway, thank you. I like it too. My kids love the Care Bears, so I was like, "Yay, Black Power Care Bears!"
That's amazing. You gotta send us one of those. I gotta print it for my kids.
Yeah, as I said, I think it got banned because she doesn't have the rights to do it or something. But anyway.
The other thing I wanted to tell you, and this isn't the question, but I saw Du Bois's interaction with Harris as just as a matter of intellectual curiosity. Him, trying to get the right answer. It's just hard trying to find the right answers for Blackness as you're going through, as you're trying to figure it out. I mean, it's a struggle for all of us, and I didn't see that as necessarily as a contradiction. I saw it as him trying to learn the right answers, so I thought that in that way it was cool. But anyway, what I wanted to ask you about, and I just wanted you to resolve something because it struck me. On page 80, you talk about, what was it? It says something, it said, here we take note that there have been many serious efforts at Black cooperative development, especially during the Great Depression years. And you go on to talk about how it was a good time for African Americans in terms of developing co-ops. And then I was thinking about this book, When Affirmative Action Was White, and it says something else. It says on page 13 here, it says, during the Great Depression, Blacks had experienced sharp downward mobility, losing the economic gains hundreds of thousands had secured by moving northward during the First World War. So I wanted to ask you about, because those seem like to be contradicting ideas, and maybe they're not, but I wanted you to explain to me how they are the same or how they are different or what's going on.
Right. Another good question. And actually it reminds me that was the other thing I had wanted to mention about Agala's when she mentioned the Bluefields Co-op, and I said that it went under after a few years during the Great Depression. So a couple things. First, the two co-ops that got started after 1918, after Du Bois had that one meeting with the Negro Cooperative Guild, he says he started about 7 co-ops started after that. I only found information about 2 of them. And my only point in saying they only lasted a couple of years, or that by the middle of the Great Depression they went under, was just because people always say, well, what happened? And this time I knew what happened to those 2. But even the Bluefields group, it was mostly a student-run store, a student bookstore and stationery store. It actually got shut down by the state of West Virginia. And someone also asked me a couple months ago why, and I actually don't know why. But remember, the state apparatus has often decided that some of these co-ops were doing wrong things, right? Remember, Garvey gets locked up for mail solicitation because he was getting people to buy shares through the mail or whatever. So it's very possible they stopped it because children under 18 weren't supposed to own a co-op or something. You know what I mean? It's right. So there's those issues, right? And that's also why a lot of this stuff gets put under the radar and underground so they don't get shut down or stopped by the authorities, that kind of thing. So that's one thing. But also, some of the co-ops do run into trouble the worse things get for African Americans as the Depression, say, goes on. But at the same time, and there's again where, history is just contradictory, right? At the same time, the Great Depression is the period of time when I found the most number of Black co-ops. So that's why I was saying the Depression was a time that was good for Black co-ops, because so many people had absolutely nothing, they were willing to try a co-op, or they had to use some kind of co-op activity to even survive, to get some food, to get some housing, to get anything. So I think, again, even though it was the absolute worst time for Blacks economically, we were in the absolute worst shape we could possibly be in. The New Deal, if anyone has studied it, just barely helped African Americans. It mostly helped whites and working class whites, and then it helped white farmers, but not Black farmers. So again, there's lots of contradictions even in the New Deal stuff. But the thing that did work is that part of the New Deal, which also people don't know about, was that the Department of Commerce had a self-help cooperative division that actually helped Black and white groups to start co-ops and gave them grants, especially if they did co-ops to help people who made less than $500 a year, which means the very poor, right? So some of the co-ops you'll see in the next coming chapters, actually one in Washington, D.C. was able to actually get a decent grant, enough of a grant money from that program to buy a farm in Maryland and do farm to city co-op stuff and bring fresh food into Blacks in Washington, D.C. during the Great Depression. So again, there's these juxtapositions, right? Huge poverty, huge marginalization, huge discrimination, some success with co-ops either at the beginning of the Great Depression. Some of those co-ops might not have lasted, but they lasted through a few years, got everybody through a few years till other programs, or they got other jobs. Some started toward the end of the Depression and were able, right? And so again, it's kind of a combination of sometimes the co-ops were thriving because it was a crisis and that was the only thing available. Sometimes the crisis created the co-op, but then when the immediate crisis is over, the co-op isn't exactly needed anymore. So yeah, I'm not sure, again, I wasn't sure how well I was able to explain all that because it changed, some of the context changed over time, but they were basically the two strands. Sometimes it was the crisis that created the co-op, but sometimes it was a crisis or continuing crisis that helped to demise the co-op.
Makes sense. Thank you.
But it definitely was a period where lots of Black folks, rural and urban, were using cooperatives. And I think I have chapter 6, I think, goes through a lot of those examples. And then chapter 7, more of the rural examples. I think that's it. Or chapter 8. Anyway, you'll see when you get to it. But yeah, so it's a very, very fertile time to talk about Black co-ops, even though, right, not all the stories are, well, it's always success, as I said, because they were able to do things and the co-ops did what they needed to do for the years that they were involved. But sometimes it's a frustrating story because you wonder, like, why couldn't the co-op lasted longer, or why couldn't they have gotten better support, or that kind of thing.
So I think based off of what you've been saying and like Kenneth's question, would you say that in the times especially of economic hardship, and I think we're seeing, like you said, very similar conditions, that cooperatives are a very viable way and often a solution to survive such economic conditions? Like, even though the New Deal and these other government programs discriminate against Black and brown folks, the self-organization of Black and brown communities through the cooperative model then helped them survive, or were what kept communities alive during that period.
Absolutely.
It's kind of leading.
Beautifully put.
Thank you.
I can't even say, I don't even know what to follow with that. That's great. That's exactly the kind of thing I mean. And definitely, I think we should take heart for that for now, right? And also there's been my co-op economics colleagues around the world, there's been several studies now that show that co-ops help people thrive or survive during crises, and also actually are more resilient during crises. So there's information about that, not just among African American co-ops, but actually internationally, we're seeing that. So it's a model, I think, because of the constant learning, because of the solidarity, all those things help help them to survive even during a crisis, but also make them a necessary activity in a crisis. Giroux, do you want to go next? Oh, sorry, did anybody else want to jump in? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in really quick. One of the things that struck me was how this activity was centered around HBCUs. And they mentioned like Coppin State in Baltimore and so forth. And I'm just wondering if any of those HBCUs have continued, in that vein, and do they still have those cooperative economics departments, or have they all just transitioned to kind of their traditional business school, like at FAM or Howard?
Yeah, I tried to do a follow-up study to the one that was done in the 1940s, because I thought that was such a fascinating study. And I did, what would you call it? I did a preliminary study. I started writing to people I knew in different HBCUs and that kind of thing. And I found out that it looked like there wasn't, right? That there was hardly any more. A lot of the co-op stuff they found in the 40s was connected to consumer economics. And so about half of the activity in the HBCUs that were co-op stuff were co-ops connected to consumer economics. But by the time I did my sort of anecdotal study trying to ask around, and I also went on websites, right, and looked to see what courses and what programs, it seemed like they all still had sort of consumer economics and home economics, but they didn't have any co-op courses that went with it. They didn't have any co-op content in the courses. So somehow, again, and it may be because of red baiting in the 1950s that the HBCUs stopped teaching that stuff. They may have been worried about losing their federal funding, right, during the McCarthy era if they were teaching about co-ops. But no one's done any study or research that I could find. And all I was able to do, as I said, was do that quick cursory look and see what was happening, and find that very little of that was happening. Even now, I mean, very few colleges and universities, even in the white communities, do co-op stuff, except some ag co-op stuff. But we have a few places that are starting now to have co-ops in their curriculum. And now also Tuskegee, I think a couple of years ago, we're working with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives to start doing a certificate in cooperative economics. But I lost track of whether they finished it and actually offer it now or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, because that was another interesting piece. I was so excited when I found the one article that explained that they had done this study about co-op and consumer training in the HBCUs. So thanks for reminding us to talk about that. Anybody else quickly, and then we'll let Giroux give his reflections. Okay, Giroux, you ready?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't really know how I could follow up after Aguila, the book connoisseur, always knows her stuff. Always appreciate hearing her talk. So a few of the things that really stood out to me, like here at KEPRA, we've been kind of having discussions around, or at least in one of the committees I'm a part of, just talking about, whether or not when we are educating a group, so like take we're doing like this economic development course for people who sign up for it. And we were trying to decide, should we teach them, tangible tools, should we teach them how to like maybe develop a website or whatever. And one of our members, Diop, he talked about how we should try to push the philosophical like underpinnings of economics and of business creation and development. And that was something that I really appreciated about the book as well, and the chapter as a whole, is that it really tries to, or it doesn't run away from the value of understanding the philosophy behind cooperative economic development. Because a lot of times, you think of the tangible reality of it, like, okay, we're all going to work together and, you know, help each other like buy or produce. But I feel like a lot of the time, the aspect of community, the aspect of, or just, you know, removing yourself from individualism, you know, values that America typically holds, but we don't really put into practice, you know, things like democracy. You know, I think using a lot of those value statements that can easily be applied to cooperatives, you know, really gauges that philosophical underpinning of it. And I just think personally that that's the way to educate. There's this book called Nudge by Richard Thaler, if you've ever heard of it, but it basically just talks about how the way to convince somebody to do something often isn't through the tangible value of, or the material value of what's gained, but rather the you know, emotional value of it. So like, for instance, if I was trying to tell you to stop smoking, it would be easy for me to say, oh, well, your lungs are going to clear up and, you know, your heart is going to feel a lot better. But most people who hear that aren't going to stop smoking. But if I told you, oh, don't you want to live longer to be with your kids and your family, then they're like, okay, I do value my friends and my family and my kids, and I do want to be with them longer. And that normally leads people to stop smoking more often. So I think having a similar approach to cooperative economics, or at least educating people about it, is important, especially now as, you know, words like socialism and cooperation in general is taboo. Also, there's a piece on page 89 where Ella Baker speaks on, you know, she describes her journeys, you know, traveling and educating people on cooperatives, and during her time with the Young Negro Cooperative League, if that's correct. And I thought it was interesting that she said that teaching about it served as the antidote to some of the hopelessness that the Black community had been experiencing up to that time. And I think that's like the key aspect of education, at least when it comes to like solving social issues, is that a lot of the time people don't know what they don't know, and they don't have maybe sometimes don't have an understanding of how to articulate their problems. And I think the key component of education that strikes me is that it allows people to say, okay, here, I've been feeling this way. You know, I've been feeling down, I've been feeling out, I've been feeling hopeless, feeling like I can't move. Oh, the reason why is because I don't have any power or control within my community. Oh, you know, the reason why is because, you know, white supremacy is not allowing me to advance societally, you know. So giving people the means to articulate some of those problems, serving as that antidote for hopelessness, I thought that was a really good piece. And then lastly, I thought it was interesting, and I spoke to this a little bit before we started the session, but last session we spoke about how Black capitalism just isn't really the means to the end that we're seeking. And I thought it was interesting how Du Bois took special care to mention the crossroads that Black people had found themselves in when it came to either pursuing wide ownership of small capital. So, you know, everybody gets a little bit, but, you know, everybody has that equal opportunity, that equal access, or we, you know, have great riches among a few people. And I thought it was especially interesting that there was, or that Du Bois was less surprised that white liberals wouldn't want to, you know, upheave their economic traditions, because obviously they wouldn't, they're benefiting greatly, but rather that the Black property owners didn't want to come in and, you know, work with these cooperative leagues, or kind of, you know, give up what they had created or established for themselves. And I think that's very relevant to today, where you find a lot of people, you know, Black or white, but it's hard to tell a capitalist to stop being a capitalist. Well, it's not hard to do, but it's hard to get them to actually want to stop being a capitalist. So I'd say that's probably the other big one, you know, how Du Bois also struggled with that, you know, almost 100 years ago. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, long story short, thematic education is important. Oh, also, I liked how they talked about how, you know, sustaining education was a vital part of just keeping an organization going, you know, keeping a movement going. My friend and I were talking not too long ago about how, you know, during the period of the civil rights movement, you know, you think about MLK or Malcolm X as, you know, the orator of the entire movement. And, you know, once the head was taken out, a lot of that movement begins to fall away because the people underneath don't have the education or, you know, whether that be in the problems that are happening or how to articulate those problems. They don't have the education to keep the movement sustainable and keep up the momentum. So I really like that piece about sustaining education as well. And that's about it.
Great, thanks. No, good stuff. You guys keep bringing up stuff I wanted to make sure to talk about in this chapter. So that's great. My Shiro, Ella Baker. Any of you who know anything about Ella Baker probably resonated to the echoes, right? So this is 1929, 1930 that she's talking about doing these tours around the country, talking to Black folks about co-op development, teaching them, doing workshops, right? She also is giving lectures about how Black women are essential to the co-op movement, all kinds of stuff, right? Well then, right, what is it, 20 or 30 years later, by the late 50s, early 60s, she's working with NAACP as a field organizer. So now all the stuff she learned in the co-op movement, she's helping the NAACP with their field organizing. She's actually one of the co-founders of the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Council. Is that their name? Right? I don't know if all you people know that, right? She's a co-founder and she was the executive director. All we ever hear about is Martin Luther King, who was president, and Abernathy, who was his second or whatever. But she was a co-founder and ran the organization. King was the face of the organization. And then, of course, she helps SNCC and is an advisor to SNCC and teaches them about grassroots organizing. But again, nobody talks about how she learned all this stuff and did this stuff already in the co-op movement, right? During the Great Depression. And then, right, and I loved her talk about, right, just going to people and explaining that they could do this and this and this made them feel so much less hopeless. Sorry, you said it better than I did. You know, it's just, to me, it's just, this is, you know, I know I'm a nerd or whatever, but that's the kind of stuff that really just fascinates me, to learn and see this stuff and to make those connections and that kind of thing. So I'm glad you reminded us of Ella Baker and how important that, right, you know, and that's the opposite of the intellectualizing, right? She's actually going and talking to ordinary, regular people and saying, this is what we can do. We can do it. You can do it just with what you have now, right? You just need to learn a little bit more about the structure and how it, you know, how you can do it within the parameters that we're living in or whatever. But you can, any of us can do this. And again, the whole next chapter is on the Young Negroes Cooperative League. So we'll talk a lot more about the role of youth that the Young Negroes Cooperative League promoted. But here I had wanted to make sure in this chapter to talk about that notion of education as, right, peer. I think Agili said that also about peer education.
Agila.
Oh God, I'm so
you're okay.
I'm so sorry. I got it right once and then I was like, I can't get it off my tongue again. But anyway, you also talked about peer education, peer-to-peer education, which I didn't even use that term. So I'm glad you brought it back because it was exactly that. It was peer, right? A lot of it is in co-op economics is peer-to-peer, right? We learn it together, we teach each other, right? It's not that we need outside experts or whatever. We just need to learn it together and then we can keep teaching each other. And I think that those pieces are really important. I have a couple other things, but I can't read my handwriting. So anybody else want to comment on Jeru? Agila, did you want to jump back in?
I thought, I mean, Jerry's piece, especially when he talked about Ella Baker, I thought was really good and kind of tied back to the earlier conversation about, like, you know, the kind of current economic conditions we're in, and how I think right now it's really important that it's now that like optimism is really important, and other leaders, like, you know, I'm thinking about like Angela Davis and other like organizers and activists talk about how you have to create hope and create the vision that you want to see. I think it's super easy to fall into a pessimism. And so I really also appreciated the Ella Baker quote of just like, cooperatives are a really tangible way of showing like, this is how you can take power into your own hands. And I think you had mentioned that there, it's like cooperatives are like a way that you can look at realizing the power that you have within you, and then organizing with others and like working with others to then create that vision to address a solution, to address a challenge. So I thought that was like, you know, really critical and important. And, you know, even if, and I think tied to our work here, like our social enterprises serve as a learning lab for the young people, that we learn about how do we work with each other, how do we talk about, you know, in addition to some of the more technical pieces like cash flow, like team management and stuff, it's also about like, what is the culture of the organization? What are we trying to do? Like, what are our goals and objectives? Conflict management too, I think, which is really important. And from like what I've seen in cooperatives, and like just any time you bring more than two people together, you're going to have to learn how to do that. I would be interested to see, like, you know, how have cooperatives, because their philosophy is rooted in cooperation and like a collective vision, how has, like, when issues have come up or when conflict has come up, like, was there a way that cooperatives tried to learn to address that together? Were there ways that, you know, or like, is that a challenge that still continues to today?
Yeah, Du Bois talked early on that challenges were about democratic governance. I didn't really learn in history how people dealt with that issue, except that several times it was brought up that people needed better training in democratic governance. So when I started studying worker cooperatives in the late 20th century and 21st century, I did find that worker cooperatives had a way to really train people how to come to consensus, how to address conflict. So conflict resolution was kind of built into a lot of the trainings, the in-house trainings, the in-service trainings. And then this new term now, conflict transformation, right, is working its way in the co-op movement too, that it's not just that we need to resolve conflict, but we need to work to address the initial issues that created the conflict, but also to figure out how to make that the disagreements that happen in a conflict, to work them out so that you can get to a better solution, a higher ground. And that's part of, right, with Curtis Haynes, when he talks about developing ourselves into better and better people through this process, right? Well, part of that process is this kind of conflict transformation process, where you use the fact that people either disagree or don't understand or have some visceral problem with something, but you use the time and the process to work through it, so that whatever clashes there are bring us to a better place, a better solution than if we ignored the conflict or just had a vote or whatever. And so I think, I honestly don't know how they did it in the past. I assume that some people naturally were able to lead people through those kinds of discussions, but now there's definitely a deliberate process of training, practicing and training in that way to get us through that, to get us better at that. And I think that's really important. Some of the groups that are doing trust building, very important. Yes, my dear.
You know, I was thinking that, you know, that's one of the things we do in our weekly staff meetings. That is an integral part. I mean, we start the meeting off with, of course, how's everybody doing? But there is always a section for conflict transformation, not resolution, not just bring it up in accuse or talk about it or whatever, but transformation. And so I have really, I never used that in the past, you know, back in the 80s and the 90s, I'm sure it was there, but it wasn't an intentional look at conflict. You know, even when I was in corporate America, it was always about, you know, let's play nice and get this project off the ground. But that conflict transformation makes the project that much stronger, because the people who had any oppositional thoughts were really looked at, because that small thing that they were talking about could be the weak link that keeps the project from being as strong as it could be. And to just look at, you know, what everybody has to say, you know, it just please bring it up. Don't walk around with it in your chest. But conflict transformation, the words there just mean so much. So when you brought it up, I just really wanted to say that's one of the things we focus on. It's good. It's good.
And if
That's
you have
great.
a conflict with Mrs. Fair, prepare to be transformed.
But yeah, and thanks for saying that. And, you know, it's come up several times that Kepra is just practicing all this stuff already. So it's really a pleasure to hear that, and to hear your community talk about what you guys are already doing and how you practice this stuff and how it's working. I mean, that's just wonderful to hear about that. And I also did you want to say something more, Alvin?
No.
Okay.
Fair said it beautifully.
I wanted to get back to something Jeru is. Am I supposed to be pronouncing it Jeru, right? Is that the right way, or did I pronounce it?
Yeah, that's right. Jeru.
Okay, Jeru. I had it wrong before. You should have corrected me.
I'm used to it. It's been like 22 years of getting called the wrong thing. So
yeah, but I don't want to be the one. Anyway, I also like your talk about the philosophy behind it, right? And some of the deliberate curricula that people were using, like the group in Gary, Indiana, which is another group I think I talk about too much, but it's just incredible, the co-op education program they did and the successes they had with it. But they actually had a course, and sort of one of their courses was in the introduction to cooperative economics and the philosophy and something of it. And then the other course was about democratic management and how to run a co-op. So they actually saw the need for both in their program and created actual courses in the night school at the high school so that people could really learn that as they became more involved in the co-op. It also, I think, helps us, right, that philosophy, right, and the fact, again, that we keep saying co-ops are a means to an end, right, the end being social, economic justice and human transformation, right? That means everything we do is part of a process, right? The same thing with why do we do conflict transformation instead of just conflict resolution, or instead of just majority rule and move on, right? Because it's all part of a process, and people agreeing that we need to change ourselves as well as the structures that we're in, right? And how do we do that? So I think that's another really important thing to think of. Another reason why I wanted to have a whole chapter on education, right? To think about the deliberateness of the process of becoming cooperators, right? Which is also really important. The other thing I have in my notes to mention is a couple of the groups had these 5-year plans, and we haven't really talked about that yet, but for me, it was really fascinating to see how they laid out a whole strategy for not just solving one problem or creating one co-op, but to do a whole long, right, years worth of, well, first we need to learn together, then we need food, then we need a gas station, then we need a credit union, right? Next time we're going to learn about the Young Negroes Cooperative League. They also had like a 5-year plan, but theirs was like for national, right? So first start with a small group in one city, and then have a bunch of credit unions and co-ops in that city, and then have a regional organization, then have co-op factories to feed all those co-op stores. And, you know, it's really exciting to me also to see, even though, again, they didn't always succeed in those plans, but it also gives us a sense about, right, how you could bring this kind of a thing to scale without losing the small local controlness part of it, right? So you have a long-term plan about what more things you could add on without diminishing the thing that you've already done, and actually enhancing or helping the thing that you've already done to do better, or to enhance what that one small thing can do, because it's connected, federated, being supplied by other similar things. And then you can build a big system that would actually solve more of the race's problem, the group's problem, that way. So I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that.
I just wanted to touch on that real quick.
Go ahead.
So do you think it's a matter of, like if we take Black people specifically, do you think it's a matter of us banding together with other Black people? Like, do you think it's a matter of, like, if we look at it in terms of like, I forget what the word is, intersectionality, do you think it's a matter of just looking at Black people coming together based on their race? Do you think it's like more of an economic thing nationally, like, oh, all the proletariat, all the working class should come together, as we see like a shrinking middle class and a higher stratification of wealth in the country? So I guess that my basic question is, do you think it's a matter of race or some other facet of intersectionality that we should be combining our efforts through, at least cooperatively?
So I actually think it's both and. I think because, and I don't know, did I say this before we got on, or maybe I said it to a different group? I'm sorry. But anyway, I'll say it again in case I didn't say it to this group. We live in such a racist, anti-Black society that I don't think we can do anything until we control our own destinies, right? Have self-determination, have some economic prosperity, have leadership in social and political stuff. And so in that sense, we have to self-segregate. We have to focus first on making ourselves strong and equalizing our position, right? We're already in a ditch, we're below a ditch. I think I did say it earlier to this group, right? We're in leaky boats. So if everything rises economically, everybody does better, we're still not going to do better because our boats aren't as good as the other boats, right? So there's too many issues of race for us to just say, oh, it's all about humanity and, all these other intersections, right? However, we're also human beings. So it is in some ways all about humanity and working together, because everybody, even white supremacists deserve a decent economy and, to be able to feed their children and live somewhere, right? Even if we don't agree with their politics, right? So I think we need to me, there needs to be sort of parallel activities, right? I think every subaltern group, right? And by subaltern, I mean the groups that aren't, don't have the political control, aren't the dominant economically, politically, socially, right? So any subaltern group, some people want to say non-whites or people of color or BIPOC, whatever group, whatever name we want to give, I think should have some level of working together within their own group to gain prosperity for their own group with some self-determination. But at the same time, because we are all human beings and we should and want to care about everybody and we want the whole world to be better, we need to also figure out how to then do we interrelate, right? And I think for me, the best way is to start with some level of segregation at the local, very small local level, but then talk about these interlocking, cooperative commonwealth, right? We can have a cooperative commonwealth with everybody. We can even have integrated co-op businesses once we have real equality, real equity. But even before we have the racial equity, our co-op can supply or be supplied by somebody else's co-op. And then we can figure out the integration part at the second and third level, right? At the level where we're federated or we're supplying each other or whatever. And then hopefully, after 10 or 20 years of that level of equity and equality, maybe then it doesn't matter whether we self-segregate or whether we segregate by race or by women or whatever. But I sort of feel the same way about women. Until women really have real leadership, sometimes we need to control our own stuff too. And I don't think I'm a segregationist. I don't think I'm a female supremacist or whatever. I think I'm just realistic, right? And, you know, I feel badly because I do believe in integration philosophically and ideally, but I'm not willing to have integration if it means we still have racism, sexism, and other marginalities, right? I'd rather not have integration if it means we're going to have what we have now. But my ideal is that we have both integration and economic justice. But I don't know, because our system, right, the capitalist system is a racialized, gendered system of inequality. We can't ignore those things and just say, let's all get along, and let's, you know, say that if we just have some economic democracy, that we have economic justice, because we're not. Even economic democracy doesn't give us economic justice if we haven't addressed anti-Blackness, anti-women, those other issues. So I hope that kind of answers it. You know, we could have a whole long discussion about that.
Yeah, it did to some degree. And I would agree, you know, it's going to have to be, instead of rather one or the other, perhaps both.
Ken, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to get your feedback on this. It's more of a story, but I wanted to give it to you and see what you have to say. You said,
you want to speak before he puts that question in?
Hello?
Ken, you need to speak up a little bit, I think.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think so.
All right. So I said I have a story to tell you. I'll make it as brief as I can, but I wanted your feedback on it. I got some sod the other day for my balding front yard. It was awful. It was beyond awful. I was embarrassed. So I got the sod, and then what happened was, you need someone to go and treat it, right? So I had someone come and treat it, and they came up, and this guy was phenomenal white guy. I have to say that he's white for a reason. He gave me all the instructions. He gave me what I needed to do, how long this process would work. He gave me a bottom line number that was really good for me. And then he turned around as it happened, and on his neck, he had 2 thunderbolts. I knew what that was immediately, because my wife watches prison shows, and so that's how I know, right? So he is part of the ultra right SS movement. He was so nice, by the way, so nice. So I decided I'm not going to go with him. But then it got me thinking about. I said, well, if I go with someone else who probably will be right too, how do I know their intent? So I was thinking about your book and your premise, and I said, well, if I was in this collective and we were all sharing, I probably would have less concern about the intent of others in that group, and that would empower me and everyone else in the group. Part of the problem with capitalism and Black folks is that we don't know the intent of the people that we give our money to. So, and we can see that we're not getting any money back from our investment in other people. So I just thought that was interesting, because I had this guy, you know, I was like, well, maybe I'll choose another white guy. I'm like, well, how do you know his intent too? So I just wanted to give you that scenario, and I was thinking about your book with regard to that situation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think that's well put, right? That's the thing with values-based economics, which is what we're talking about, right? Solidarity economics, cooperative economics, it's about values-based. So at least all the people who are doing in that structure have similar values or goals or purposes. And then you know it, right? In the capitalist system, all you know is that their value is profit making. You don't know if they have any other better values, or if they care, or if they'll let their other values supersede their profit making, right? You just know. And also, one of the other things about the capitalist system is that they believe in this, what economics calls the black box, right? That whatever happens inside a business, it's a private business, it's their business, it's nobody else's business. And cooperatives and solidarity economics believe in transparency. They believe everybody should know what you're doing, what you believe, how you operate. right? So it is, I mean, so you're right in that sense. If you were in a co-op, or if you hired a co-op, or if you're with, used a company that was more in the vein of a solidarity economics, you could at least know what their intent was, regardless of what their other political beliefs were. It wouldn't matter how they vote, but what their intent is in terms of the economic relationships, you would know. And that's one of the things I think that have made people more excited about co-ops. It's if you go back to the introduction of my book, I have a section in there where I think it was the New York State Ag Department in the 20s had started writing about why they thought co-ops were better for northern agriculture. And that's one of the things I say, the transparency. You don't have to fight about this and that. You know that everybody, you know, has these same values or views about doing business with you and doing farming and that kind of thing. And so it takes that uncertainty, it takes that lack of information out of the picture. And so in that sense, it's actually a more efficient way to do business with people.
Thank you.
And so I think you're right, but you know, we still haven't been able to make more of the US like that, right? That's the big challenge for us. How do we get more people to operate that way? It's really hard. But, you know, I believe we keep trying, and that we do better by trying, right? We do better as human beings, we do better as individuals, and as human beings, we do better as a group if we keep trying to move toward that in whatever ways we can.
But do you think, Dr. Nembhard, do you think we're at an inflection point in terms of particularly the pandemic showing that the current economic system does not work for most people, you know, 99%, you know, or 95, or at least 90% of people? So have you seen in following this movement any kind of uptick in the last, let's just say maybe starting with, you know, Occupy Wall Street and Zuccotti Park, you know, up to the current day? Are you seeing more kind of, you know, whether it's people writing about it, people talking about it, more so in the mainstream or so forth? Have you seen any uptake in that activity at all?
Oh, absolutely. So definitely since what we were calling the Great Recession and the financial collapse of what was that, 2007, between 2007, 2009 or 10, right? Actually, the number of worker co-ops in the United States has like doubled or something since then. I had a lot of people interested even before my book came out in 2014. I had people interested because I had started talking about this stuff before the book came out, and I had been writing some stuff. Curtis and I actually wrote our first article about this using co-ops in the Black community in 1999. So definitely by 2007, 2008, or 2009, by 2009, I definitely had a lot more interest in people wanting me to even talk about it, right? And we see an uptake also in Black food co-ops after that period. And then absolutely since February, right? If you just count the what would you call it? How much more attention my book and my work are getting, right? So since the book came out, the first year I was doing 2 to 3 talks a month. And then after that, it kind of tapered off to maybe 1 talk a month, something like that, until around, well, I guess the beginning of 2020. Now, especially, it's easier with Zoom and whatever. I'm doing 2 and 3 talks a week about mutual aid, Black cooperatives. I mean, it's about exhausting me. I'm trying to figure out how to keep it up.
You know, one of the things that, you know, again, struck me, and I was on a call with some colleagues from work, and we call ourselves the Black Lady Brunch Group. So it's all the Black women.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, we actually used to have brunch when you could do that, you know,
right.
4 and 4.5 hour brunches, which I really miss. But now we, you know, have to do Zoom calls. And I was telling them about your book because, you know, of course, with the election coming up and people were feeling like, you know, oh my goodness, what does this mean? You know? And so I was trying to say, you know, look, you know, Black folks, when we have faced even, I would say even more dire circumstances, you know, post-Reconstruction, depression or so forth, have found a way to come together And I'm like, you know, and it's amazing what people were able to do when they came together, what Black people were able to do when they came together in solidarity. And I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from the past. And so even though and they've had many more forces arrayed against them than we do. And so one of the things I was wondering is, you know, maybe there needs to be like a Kim Burns style documentary on co-ops, you know, because I think that for some people, this is still like, you know, as you said, they did a good job in the 50s of making this, you know, communist and so antithetical to this rugged individualism and the American way of life. And so I'm just wondering, you know, have people talked about trying to really resurrect and bring to the fore this rich history of co-ops in the United States to be able to show that, you know, one way, this kind of hyper-capitalistic way, has not always been the way. I mean, even in the Black community, you know, we hold up and I think for good reasons, you know, Maggie Lena Walker, she did, you know, of Course, amazing things, and Madam C.J. Walker, you know, shout out to Indianapolis and so forth. But so these individual Black entrepreneurs that blaze trails, but all of this other stuff that we're reading about, and I like to consider myself a student of history, I didn't know. So what are some ways do you think that we can begin to kind of excavate this history to show that this isn't new. This is in many cases have been the way that we've made it from generation to generation.
Wow. I mean, I couldn't put it better than that, but you know, you were asking me what we can do. I mean, part of it is just we need to keep talking to other people, right? I do have a couple people who keep saying they want to do a documentary on Black co-op history, but then they haven't been able to raise the money for it. So figuring out how to raise the money for it is important. There are
KI New Media calling you.
There are some small little video pieces about some integrated co-ops and some Latinx co-ops. There's not as much about Black co-ops per se. There's a little bit more information. I'm working on a graphic novel version of Collective Courage so that I can hit more audiences that way. But we definitely need a lot more people thinking about how to do this. We need to raise the money for the documentaries. And then I've been arguing with the mainstream co-op movement that they need to integrate more of this information in what they do and the materials that they have.
And do they have a school's curriculum?
What do you mean a school's curriculum?
I'm sorry. So like, for instance, you know, for many years, I was a volunteer and I taught junior achievement, but that's, you know, about individual, right. Do they have something similar to be able to go?
No, they don't have. Yeah, they don't seem to yet. I once remember like 10 years ago that 4-H was supposed to be having some kind of co-op curriculum, and then I never heard about it again every time I tried to see their materials. So I don't know if it fell through or if they were doing it quietly or what happened. But you're right. Yeah, a junior co-op achiever kind of thing would be another great thing to do. You know, I've been advocating that we do like Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico actually has a co-op curriculum for K to 12.
Really?
I mean,
wow.
Some of it's very simple, like the kindergartners, it's just like a co-op coloring book or something, but still they introduce the notion of cooperation and then economic cooperation. For K through 12, they have a school mandate for that. So, you know, we should be trying for something like that. So there's a lot of stuff, more stuff we should be doing, but we need a whole groundswell, right? We need people to either demand it or to start getting their states to do it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think we're out of time actually, but go ahead.
I was going to say real quick, I see, you know, maybe a charter school, because they're like, you know, charter schools who focus on business and entrepreneurship. Right. And also focus on co-ops as well.
Yeah. No, keep thinking. There are some charter schools that are worker co-ops that are owned and run by the teachers. And of course, there's some child care centers and pre-Ks that are owned and run by the parents as co-ops. But there's not, right, but having a school, like a high school that's devoted to co-op. Actually, there is one in Chicago. It's not just co-ops, they're doing polytechnical training, but they also train students in co-ops. And one of the projects they have to do before they graduate is to design a co-op.
Interesting.
Yeah, Austin Polytechnical in Chicago, but
Okay.
the only one I know of.
Okay, thanks.
Well, it's 7:35, and Kenneth says that he volunteers if there aren't two people. So are there two people?
Oh, right, for chapter 5. Thanks for reminding me. I almost forgot.
Mm-hmm.
You see how well it goes. We need these reflections.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Let's see now. Casman, huh? Are you thinking about volunteering, dear? Let's see here. We've got...
I can volunteer. I knew you were going to say my name too.
Yeah, good. Okay.
You got ESP. It's that big brain. That big brain. You just...
Thanks, Casman. I knew you would. Thank you.
No problem.
Right. It's about the Young Negroes Cooperative League. So
and we got a young person. Great. Yeah.
Good.
Yay.
So we're gonna let Kenneth do it and Casman, or we want somebody else, another young person.
Somebody will have to let Kenneth know.
Hey,
that he will have to do
Kenneth's young because he's a month younger than me, so to me he's still young.
Okay, so that's who I've got. If somebody else wants to do it, just a surprise commentator, just
please
show up.
Show up and be ready to talk about it. Deidre, would you let Kenneth know?
Yeah, I'll tell him.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I guess we've got to stop. The time always goes so fast.
Mm-hmm. Fastest hour and a half of my life.
Yes,
thanks
and
everybody,
so interesting.
I want
Thank you.
to clap for our reflections.
Hey, thank you,
Thank
J-Ru.
you.
Thank you, Agila.
Thank
you guys
you,
are great.
job.
Yeah,
Guys are
great job.
Thank you. Good job, J-Ru.
Great job, everybody.
Man, y'all are real beautiful.
Thank y'all.
Bring a tear to my eye. Y'all great.
Keep it around, Agila. Friends for 9. Keep it up.
I knew I threw that in just for you, Em.
Don't worry, next time I will mention Chancellor Williams and really, show some real knowledge or something like that.
Hey, J-Ru, I want you not only to mention it, but I like for you to read it.
I've read it. I will show you my tabs.